We're going to be spending some time over the next 2 sessions with the Austrian composer Joseph Haydn, one of the great trio of composers of the classical period, but in many ways the least well known. With all the time spent on the boy genius Mozart and movie Amadeus and that sort of thing, and the angst-ridden Beethoven stalking up and down, fulminating at the universe, it's very easy for this congenial man Haydn to be overlooked. Joseph Haydn never got a movie, but he probably should have. Maybe one day he will. But after all, before Haydn, the string quartet did not exist. The symphony was really thought of as mere background music. And serious music, other than sort of some big set pieces for the church, was thought of really as a bagatelle for the aristocracy or something to kind of just go along with the church service. Over his very long career, Haydn really created whole genres of music and massively expanded others, influencing all the major composers of the day, including Mozart and Beethoven. He had a genuinely good personality. A brief biographical sketch of Haydn. He was born in 1732, same year as George Washington, in a small town in Austria. And at age 7 or 8, imagine that, at that tender age, he was taken into the choir school at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, which was probably the pinnacle of that type of music making in Austria at the time. He had a very good sort of training experience there where he got his basic education. Then when his voice changed at age 18, he was summarily dismissed from the cathedral, no longer of use to them. He spent his 20s training, teaching, and sort of working in the musical world of odd jobs in and around Vienna when he was noticed by Prince Esterhazy, who was this very rich nobleman, one of the richest aristocrats in Vienna. This was around 1761 when Haydn would have been almost 30. Esterhazy was a man whose wealth rivaled even that of the emperor. And it was in the service of these great Austro-Hungarian magnates, the Esterhazys, that Haydn really developed into a mature composer. Haydn spent nearly 30 years serving the Esterhazys at their main palace in Eisenstadt and at their grand summer palace, which was patterned after Versailles. And one of the really interesting things about Haydn is that all of the rooms for which he wrote his great music are still around today. You can actually go visit them in Eisenstadt and Esterházy and even the Hanover Square rooms in London. As Haydn grew older, however, and continuing to work in the aristocratic employ of the Esterhazys, he started to chafe a bit at the restrictions of being out there in the middle of nowhere, kind of rotting away in the countryside with the prince and princess. At one point, his frustration boiled over in a letter to a friend saying, "I don't know whether I'm a Kapellmeister or a Kapell servant." But regardless, he was not happy at that point in his life. When Prince Nicholas Esterhazy, sort of one of the greatest musical ones of the different princes in the family, died in 1790, his successor was not musically inclined, and he radically downsized the musical establishment. And Haydn essentially found himself made redundant at that point. He had sort of, a modest portfolio, but all the musicians were gone and there wasn't much left for him to do. Now we should back up a little at this point to think kind of about Haydn's place in the pantheon of the great classical composers. We normally think of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven lined up like little busts on the piano in your piano teacher's apartment in order of birth, with Haydn coming first, then Mozart, then Beethoven. And in fact, most of what we think of as Haydn's greatest work came in the decade after Mozart's death. So we can sort of think of Haydn, Mozart, Haydn again, and then Beethoven in sort of the progression of music history here. Now, around the same time Haydn was released essentially from the Esterházy court, big things were beginning to happen for his friend and mentee Mozart. Mozart had been looking forward to a major international tour to London, organized by the impresario Johann Peter Salomon. But as fate would have it, Mozart died suddenly at a very young age in late 1791. And with Haydn now newly available, Salomon quickly leapt upon him and offered the opportunity of the London trip to Haydn. and the rest really is history. Haydn did 2 major stints in England in the 1790s and another stint in Paris, gaining international acclaim and wealth. In other words, he left Esterházy a servant and returned a superstar. His major focus in London was writing his great late symphonies, which are still among the greatest ever written. These were designed as great works for public performance rather than kind of incidental background music for the aristocratic court. In London, he found listeners who thrilled to his inventiveness, his mastery of musical rhetoric, his sense of occasion. In the words of one reviewer in London, like our own Shakespeare, he moves and governs the passions at will. And they loved his symphonies. They gave them little names: the Surprise Symphony, the Military Symphony, the Drum Roll Symphony, the London Symphony, in fact, based on a folk theme from the London farmers' market. But also while he was in England, he was profoundly influenced by hearing the great choral works of Handel, the oratorios, the anthems, in these monumental public performances by large groups, as if an entire people was singing together. And he wrote that he wanted to compose himself works meant for an entire nation. When Haydn returned to Austria, he was offered the chance to really kind of design his own job back at the Esterházy court. The unmusical prince had died, replaced by a new one who really recognized a good thing when he had it. And he basically gave Haydn, carte blanche to compose as he wanted, when he wanted. And it was there at the age of 64, an old man by the standards of the age, that he turned to his final and greatest project, really, the 2 oratorios, the Creation and the Seasons, and a series of 6 great symphonic masses, the late masses of Haydn, culminating in the 1802 Harmony Messa, a sublime work that we're going to hear next week. In 1802, shortly after finishing the Harmony Messa, Haydn had a series of cardiovascular incidents, mini strokes probably, that robbed him of his ability to compose. He then sort of settled into a pleasant retirement. He saw students, he gave them lessons, he chatted with them about the old days, and developed this great following of students who called him Papa Haydn at that point. In 1809, he finally died at the age of 77, very advanced age for that time, during the French siege of Vienna. In a gesture of respect and admiration, Napoleon actually stationed an honor guard outside his suburban home during his final days. What can we say about Haydn's style, his compositional signature? What makes Haydn Haydn as opposed to any other composer? And I think for me, it's really the steadying quality of his music, the grace, muscularity, the sense of occasion, the moments of theater and surprise, and above all, its universality. It speaks to all of us as equals. It manages to be reassuring without ever being routine, and it surprises and delights, but it's never trite. It's never a silly joke. It's always with wit and purpose. It's music for a turbulent airplane ride when you need to be settled and steadied. Leonard Bernstein, who adored and was deeply committed to Haydn's symphonies and late choral works, remarked on Haydn's musical wit in one of his young people's concerts. I loved how he called them young people's concerts and not children's concerts. These are like fully formed people that you're talking to. And he said to the people this: "Let's get down to the real heart of the matter, wit. I'm sure you remember what we said last time about Haydn's wit, how he surprises you all the time, how he gets fun into his music through sudden pauses, sudden louds, and sudden softs, and how he makes humor through using those fast, scurrying themes that reminded us of a little dachshund puppy skittering all over the floor." That's kind of how I think of Haydn, like a really smart, fun grandparent or uncle or aunt, the kind who's very serious and imposing, who you just respect unquestioningly, but who can also get down on the floor with you and play and make fun of the other grown-ups. Today we're going to listen to Haydn's Te Deum. This is one of several settings of the work by Haydn, and I think his most famous one. The Te Deum prayer, or Ambrosian hymn, is one of the most ancient prayers in Christendom. And by the 17th and 18th centuries, it was fashionable to program it for big celebrations, royal occasions, and the like. Thinking of these majestic settings by the French composers Lully and Charpentier for the French royal court, and also Handel's famous Te Deums for the Hanoverian kings during the 1700s, things to mark major military victories or herald the end of an epidemic, maybe. Just to give you a sense of that military character, we're going to listen to a little bit of Handel's Dettingen Te Deum to celebrate a major military victory by the English. Let's listen to what that sounds like. So you hear these festive trumpets and drums. A very kind of bombastic setting. Haydn's Te Deum was commissioned by the Austrian Empress, so it was a royal commission, and it had its first performance in 1800 during a visit from the English naval hero Lord Nelson, no stranger to militaristic Te Deum settings. And it was played for him along with Haydn's Lord Nelson Mass on that same visit. Now, unlike Handel, Lully, and the other French composers, Haydn took a single movement approach, sort of an all-choral approach to the Te Deum. Two festive sections surrounding a short contemplative episode, culminating in this no-nonsense fugue on the text, "O Lord, in thee have I trusted, let me never be confounded." Now, confounded, I love that word. Whenever I think, if I'm waiting in line for the subway and not getting into the car, I'm thinking, confounded. I think we should use that word more. The opening phrase of Haydn's setting quotes from an ancient Gregorian chant that was typically associated with the Te Deum prayer, the 8th psalm tone, which sounds like this. Te Deum laudamus. And he uses that right at the beginning of his piece. As just this sort of fun device to start it off and immediately anchor it for people. The later Austrian composer, Anton Bruckner, in his huge setting of the Te Deum, used that at the beginning of his piece as well. So again, evoking this ancient kind of form of worship and this timeless character. Haydn uses this kind of attention-grabbing device throughout the work as he puts choral unisons, all the voices singing the same note together or in octaves, to underline key dramatic moments in the sacred text. The text itself is ecstatic. It's almost sycophantic in its tone of praise. It's we praise you. The glorious company of the Apollices praise you. The goodly fellowship of the prophets praise you. The noble army of martyrs praise you. The holy church throughout all the world doth acknowledge thee. Praise God in all of his awesomeness. But even with all of that kind of crazy language, the piece is really a model of very concise expression. Not one bit of text is ignored or overlooked or given short shrift, but he manages to fit it all together in a nice, tight, expressive little package. In this sense, it shows Haydn really at the height of his compositional skill. We hope you enjoy this live performance of Haydn's Te Deum in C, recorded at Grace Church a little over a year ago. We praise thee, O God.